Hello everyone and welcome to DownUnderSteer, providing you with all the latest Formula 1 news, race reviews, opinion and speculation. My name's Franky and I'm crazy about F1. In today's show, pre-season news, an analysis of the Jerez testing, changes to the driver lineups, we pull apart the technical changes for the 2012 season and give opinion about the current state of Formula 1. The footage you're seeing in the background is from the Codemasters F1 2011 title. Let's go! So what's happening on the grid for the 2012 season? For the top teams, the driver lineups remain largely unchanged. We've got Schumacher and Rosberg remaining at Mercedes, Webber and Vettel at Red Bull, Alonso and Massa at Ferrari, Button and Hamilton stay at McLaren, and in the midfield, Perez and Kobayashi have remained at the Sauber team. For the teams who have changed their driver lineup, we see the two new guys Ricciardo and Verne in the Toro Rosso team. Raikkonen makes his return with Romain Grosjean in the Lotus. Senna joins Maldonado at the Williams team. Hulkenberg joins Di Resta at Force India. Caterham have announced that Petrov will be taking Jarno Trulli's spot aside Heikki Kovalainen. HRT have announced that Karthikeyan will be joining De La Rosa, and Marussia Virgin Racing will have Charles Pic alongside the remaining Timo Glock. With the return of Kimi Raikkonen to the Lotus team, we now see 6 world champions on the field for 2012. Has Raikkonen still got it? Only time will tell. For a more technical look at the changes for this year, I'm now joined by Jem. The much talked about change for the 2012 season is we've got the stepped noses, the design change to make the cars more safe.
Yeah.
To potentially stop a front-on or a side-on intrusion into a driver's head.
Yeah, and I think also with a lower nose they were hoping to prevent the flips that Mark Webber did at Valencia 2 years ago.
And also the unusual accident where Luizzi mounted up on Schumacher. That could have been a fairly nasty accident.
Yeah, it came quite close to his helmet, didn't it?
Whether it's going to make much of a difference to safety, it's hard to tell, of course. There's still a nose in the way, right?
And they're trying to also, in a way, make rules that are stopping freak accidents. It might not happen again for 10 years, or you could get 2 in one race, so...
That's right. That's the unpredictable nature of it. Pretty much, we'll show a pic of each one. So we'll start off with the Caterham, who were the first to reveal their 2012 challenger.
So, I mean, for that reason, it prompted probably a lot more media time than it would otherwise warrant, just because the front nose was so controversial looking.
The rest of the car, we'll probably see this along most of them, but there wasn't huge differences in the designs of the cars, really, except for the noses and the side pod.
Yeah, the side pods, the intake for the radiators seems to be smaller than ever for this year. Yeah. Like, they've really tightened that up. It must be putting all F1 cars on the brink of their cooling systems. I mean, Red Bull always had that problem ever since Adrian Newey joined them, because he's always produced a pretty tightly packaged car, and cooling's always been at a premium. But I wonder if this could be an issue for all cars, especially at the hot races like Bahrain and Malaysia and Singapore.
Looking up the field, we've got Force India, same kind of design, although they've got a bit of a wing on the front of the nose as well.
Yeah, which is an odd-looking thing. I wonder if that will still be there come the first race, or it's just a component to help measure airflow during testing.
That is a good call, but along those same lines, there's the Williams also has a wing at the front, and the Sauber also has an unusual kind of fin halfway along the nose.
Oh, okay, yeah, it does, right.
So whether this is going to have much effect on the performance, of course, it's part of the whole package.
Yeah, the Sauber and the Caterham seem to have the narrowest noses. I guess the Renault nose is also a pretty odd-looking one. The step on that one isn't as severe as on some other cars, like notably the Ferrari. And I quite like the raked uprights holding onto the front wing. I think that's actually quite a good-looking car. The Renault.
The Lotus, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it looks the best out of the new design. The Ferrari, of course, it looks like it's made of Lego. I'm not too fussed, really, about how this design changes has taken effect.
No, and apart from the front end of the Ferrari, I think actually the rest of the car is quite good looking. Yeah. But yeah, the front end is very squared off, and it does make it look a lot like Lego, you're right.
So then we've got, then we step into maybe the controversial grounds, where we've got the Red Bull nose. And now, yes, they do have the stepping on it, but they've got a vent or cavity built into that box section of the nose.
Okay.
Whether they're using it to cool the driver was one point of speculation. Well, it's directly at the angular part of the nose, and there's speculation that they're using this to perhaps increase aero benefit, whereas they've denied it and have said that it's used for cooling the cockpit.
Yeah, right. It seems pretty unlikely. But, I mean, if Red Bull has got it to the first test and it's deemed to be legal, then, I mean, obviously the FIA and Charlie Whiting have had a look at it and agreed that it's within the rules. So maybe we'll see other cars following suit before too long.
I guess we'll see about that. But whether you need cooling for your cockpit while you're driving at 300 k's an hour, I'm not sure.
I'm not buying that for a second, and especially an Adrian Newey designed car, it's hardly going to be concerned about the comfort of the driver. So what about the McLaren's front nose?
Okay, of course, McLaren have got, I guess, the boldest design this year, which is they've got the same design from last year. You know, they haven't taken this stepped nose path.
No, and it's unusual.
Is it going to hurt them?
Well, no, I'm not sure. It's unusual that they're the only team that didn't conclude that the stepped nose was the best route to go down design-wise. But I have to say that I do think, I mean, it is clearly the best-looking front end and probably is the best-looking car on the F1 grid.
Of course, the one team who's yet to reveal their 2012 car, Mercedes.
Yes, a very late release this year.
So much speculation on whether they will or won't have the stepped platypus nose, if you will. But hot off the presses, I'm very happy to announce that I do have a early promotional photo of the Mercedes. So we'll just pop that up there. And
yeah, it looks good. It's a good-looking car.
It's they've forgotten to turn on the lights, I think, in this promotional pic. But keeping the nose under wraps still.
Yeah, and what do you think is going on with Mercedes here? Like, do you think this actually has been a planned later release of their car, or have things been going on in the factory over the winter that's meant that they were forced to miss the first test?
Well, I guess they did say that this was an intentional plan to miss the first testing so that they could further develop their car.
Yeah, and I think what they sort of mentioned that they wouldn't be at the first test pretty early on. Like, it was in December, I'm pretty sure. So I guess they've known for a long time that they were still not going to be ready come the beginning of February.
Yeah. And I mean, it didn't seem to bother Ross Brawn in the slightest. I saw a comment that he made. It's like, look, this is when it's coming. You know, we need this development time. Yeah. We're not worried about it.
Yeah.
Just, you're going to have to deal with this.
Now, you can spend so much time in the factory putting your car together and looking at what computers are telling you, but track time is where it's at, isn't it? And you have such limited amounts of track time these days.
I guess to their benefit, they do have two very strong drivers who are not coming into the team this year. You know, they've been around for at least a year.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I guess Michael Schumacher, I mean, if you've got him testing your car for you, then you can probably afford to miss a test session.
That's right, he's been there and done that for many years. So maybe we should move on and talk about the second, I guess, big technical change for the 2012 season, which is the rear-facing exhaust. So now they're under strict regulation. No more blowing your exhaust into the diffuser underneath the car. Really, it's quite strict in the fact that it's deemed that you're not allowed to have any aero benefit from your exhaust gases. So they have to exit at the rear of the car in a predefined area, facing at a particular angle as well.
Yeah, and I think of all the technical things that have been going around at the beginning of this year, the whole stepped nose issue has been talked up, but I think what is going to cause a much bigger difference to the cars is the fact that the hot-blowing exhausts are now gone.
Very good call.
And for the cars that it really worked well on, for example, the Red Bull, I am curious to see as how losing that technology is going to change the handling of their car.
So we've got our rear exhaust package now. Great. You know, there's a lot of reasons why they took this path. Costs being one. It was very expensive to develop the hot-blown exhaust, which we saw last year.
Yes, very complicated computer software running that in their ECUs.
That's right. So now that we've got these rear-facing exhausts, you know, what can you do, or what can the teams do to exploit them? For instance, can you start blowing hot air out of your rear-facing exhaust?
Well, I don't think you'll be able to blow hot air at all, because I'm pretty sure that the rules will not only stipulate where the exhausts come out of the bodywork and the angle that they point, but also there'd be rules governing the ECU which would prevent you from igniting petrol in your exhaust system. Okay. So I think hot blowing certainly is gone altogether. I mean, they may be able to direct the exhaust gases while they're just driving along normally onto other parts of the car, perhaps the rear ring or even maybe the rear suspension.
Is that a worthwhile path to be sending hot air? Do you want it going over your suspension frame?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, I'm not sure if heating up your suspension components is the safest thing. Yeah. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to see how Red Bull respond to this, because it seems that their blown exhaust system was by far the best last year. I mean, have you seen a car in the last 10 years that has been more planted than a Red Bull over the last season? No. Like, the grip levels were just phenomenal. Seeing some of those pole laps from Vettel were just supreme. Yeah, absolutely.
You just can't deny how amazing those pole laps were.
Yeah. I mean, he had the car that he could do it in. And watching the RB7 around corners like Turn 8 at Turkey and the 130R at Suzuka, Red Bull was the only car that could have its DRS open going through 130R last year, which just goes to show how much downforce the car must still have been generating.
And that was an interesting moment, because I think there was a situation where Kobayashi was perhaps trying to run his DRS through 130R and then ended up having this amazing
oversteering
save. Much broadcast save.
Showing off in front of a home crowd. But I mean, it was an excellent indicator to see, how much more downforce a Red Bull had compared to a midfield car. Just masses.
I guess the other thing which this leans towards is that it seems like for each year for quite some time now we've had one technical innovation which has really made a large difference to the leading cars. For instance, very obviously last year we had the blown exhaust, which we just talked about. Going a year back, McLaren had their F-duct.
Which all teams ended up copying. Because I think I remember in 2010 by Spa we had the Red Bull cars driving up Eau Rouge one-handed because they were using their left hands to cover up the F-duct.
It didn't quite seem right, did it?
No.
These frankly quite high-speed areas, having drivers going around with one hand didn't quite seem right. And of course, going back from there, we've got 2009, we had the double diffuser, which was a Brawn used to great advantage at the start of the season.
Yep.
And I think, was it Toyota who also
using it? Yeah, and I think Williams also had it at the start of the season. But I mean, Brawn really got theirs to work. And in fact, that double diffuser was the sort of start of a real design race towards the rear of the car. Because from the double diffuser came the blown exhaust through the diffusers, which led to hot blown diffusers. So really that's been a sort of a technological story that's been happening over the last 3 or 4 years now. In 2006 there was the Renault mass damper, which was banned midway through the season after Ferrari protested. By all accounts, Renault had been using that system since 2005. So for 18 months it was legal, but then once Ferrari got involved in a championship race, I don't want to get all paranoid or anything. And then even looking back further, like 1998, which was the first year of grooved tyres, and McLaren had that third brake pedal, which they could use to brake just one...
inside front, was it?
There was the rears.
Rear.
Yep.
Yeah. So to assist with steering around maybe low-speed corners?
It was basically a form of manually operated traction control.
Yeah.
They could flick it left to right.
I wonder how long they would have gotten away with that if it wasn't for the curious cameraman or pit reporter who's stuck their camera into the McLaren, spotting the third pedal, and hence...
I think people had already begun to notice, because when a McLaren was cornering and accelerating out of corners, you could see the rear brake discs glowing on one side or the other. So, I mean, there'd be no reason for the driver to have his foot on the brake pedal when he's accelerating out of a corner unless some kind of trickery was afoot.
And I guess, going back to this year's season,
The one technical innovation which was halted was the anti-dive system, which Lotus was quite a strong purveyor of.
Yeah, I mean, they've been developing the technology since the beginning of last year, and they've been approaching the FIA and Charlie Whiting continuously to make sure that the system was legal, and they've been getting the go-ahead the entire time. But once other teams found out about it at the beginning of this year, it didn't take too long for the whole system to be banned. And I've got to say, I feel sorry for Lotus. Normally with these kind of technical innovations, you get to use them for the season that you introduce them, and then they'll ban them at the end of the season. But I mean, at the same time, a braking system is never going to give as much time over a lap as, for example, the hot blow and exhaust systems were.
So this year, are we looking at a season where perhaps on a technical level, we've got 12 teams which are on an even playing field?
Well, yeah, it may be the first time in a long time where one team doesn't have a distinct technological advantage, and then the rest of the grid is playing catch-up over the rest of the year to try to integrate that system into their car. But I mean, saying that, that's one of the appeals of Formula One, isn't it? Is watching that team come out with something that no one else had thought of, and then technical minds back at factories scrambling to try and redesign their cars to integrate it onto theirs. But we may not see that this year, no.
Testing at Jerez. We've come to an end for the first round of testing. Were you watching the text commentary?
Of course I was.
Of course you were. That's right. As any discerning F1 fan should be doing, they should be sitting at a desk watching some fairly slow-moving text while F1 cars are racing around for the first time in the season.
Yeah, hanging off every word. As we all know, times from testing can be basically meaningless, and probably are, but it doesn't mean we can't look at them and wonder. The striking thing is, once they've combined the 4 days of testing and had a look at the best times, it's Rosberg first and Schumacher third in the Mercedes. So what does that say about the quality of last year's car?
That's it. Does it talk about the quality of last year's car, or does it talk about the fact that none of these teams are yet to show their hand?
Yeah, that's exactly it. They were just tyre testing, weren't they?
They may have been trying new aero components.
Yeah,
sure.
New front wings, things like that. But I mean,
probably a rear wing would be on the cards there, hence the new exhaust change. Looking at some of the other results going down the field, we've got Ferrari, who were quoted as not being very happy with the performance.
At the end of day 3, Pat Fry, rather unusually I thought from Ferrari, admitted that they weren't particularly happy where they were thus far. But of course the very next day Alonso went out and set fastest time on the last day of testing. So
it's true. And it has to make you think though, was that a bit of a token lap to keep some of the stakeholders happy?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I think there's still a psychological advantage in winning testing. I mean, who came fastest on the first day?
Raikkonen was fastest on the first day.
Yeah, in a Lotus.
And yeah, in the Lotus. And I mean, he was fastest very, very early on in the day as well.
Yeah, and weren't the fans just loving that? Raikkonen coming back and going fastest on the first day. I mean, it was good to see Kimi Raikkonen back in a 2012 F1 car.
After that break, you must be itching to have a fairly good flog around a track in that time. I think he might have stretched the legs there in doing so.
Yeah, I'm sure he was having a great time. But he did win the first day of testing, but by the end of the whole complete test session, it was Raikkonen in 10th and 1.2 seconds faster than him, and second fastest overall was Romain Grosjean in the other Lotus.
That's right.
And yet that news has gone fairly unreported. So I'm not sure if that's Grosjean just running a different program, or is he looking to put his marker down as the man at Lotus. So he's not necessarily the new guy in the way that Kimi Raikkonen is. Although, let's be honest, probably for the team, is Raikkonen the more exciting bet, or is it Grosjean?
Grosjean was never particularly exciting, I'm sorry to say. But, of course, Kimi Raikkonen, he's not exciting to talk to, but holy shit, he's really exciting to see on the racetrack.
So what else can we get from testing?
Well, the other quite important thing to come out of the Jerez testing was the performance of the Toro Rosso team and both of their rookies. Now we're looking at Ricciardo and Vergne, who set basically identical times and even a very similar number of laps, being 157 and 159.
Yeah, this is a fascinating battle to watch between these two, because you have to suspect that they are racing They're competing for, as a prize, an RB9 drive in 2013.
Possible teammates with Sebastian Vettel in the future.
I mean, Webber has only got a one-year contract, so his future is very much up in the air at the moment. And I think it's going to be an interesting battle between these two this year. You'd have to expect for at least the first 5 or 6 races, Ricciardo is going to have an advantage because he did spend 11 Grand Prix weekends driving for HRT last year. And Vergne, although he's had time in an F1 car and he's done a lot of racing, he hasn't done the full Grand Prix weekend as a driver.
So if you wanted to pick one as the number one driver, if you will, for Toro Rosso?
Well, you'd have to go Ricciardo just because he's had more time in an F1 car. With Bruno Senna taking the second seat at Williams, it looks like Rubens Barrichello's career has finally come to an end.
It certainly looks that way. He has, he's taken a step into an IndyCar.
Yeah, well, he's been in negotiations to get the drive. But I have to admit, after 20 years, I think Rubens Barrichello had definitely had a good chance in Formula One, and I'm not altogether sorry to see him go. Admittedly, he was a nice guy. He was a race winner for 2 different teams, Ferrari and Brawn. He was pushing on towards 40, and I do feel that he was maybe just hanging around and taking a seat which could be better used by a new guy. When it comes to these older guys, I do feel the same way about Jarno Trulli, who's still driving at Caterham for this year, and indeed Michael Schumacher.
It's probably harder from Michael's point of view than it is for Rubens or Jarno in the fact that they're still continuing their career until they're finished. I think it's much harder to have a successful comeback. I think you'd be struggling to try and think of a driver in any form who's successfully made a comeback and performed better.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are cases of that in Formula One. I mean, Alain Prost sat out the 92 season and then came back in 93 to win the championship. And
he came back in
the best car. Yeah, Williams Renault. I mean, also Niki Lauda retired and then came back and won another championship for McLaren and came within half a point of winning 2 championships for McLaren. Yeah. So it is possible. But I mean, you still, I guess, need the car to be able to compete for the championship. And at the moment, Mercedes is just not proving that.
Yeah. So when does the driver stop being the old wise sage in the field and becomes the pain in the arse that's preventing the new rookies from moving to that division?
Well, where do you draw the line? And I think the highly restrictive nature we have. The highly restrictive rules we have placed on testing now are in some way causing this issue of older drivers tending to stick around for longer. Also the fact, of course, that Formula One is much safer than it was 20 or 30 years ago.
We're too well stocked because they're not dying?
Well, to be brutally blunt, yes. But I think also because the F1 teams are so restricted in the testing they can do, more experienced drivers are more valuable because they are much able to give better technical feedback. And they've had a lot more experience in a big range of F1 cars. And so they rely a lot more on that technical feedback from the driver because they don't have nearly as much time with test drivers. And that's where rookies, I think, with these rules are really struggling because they get so little time in the car before they're asked to go out for a full weekend, practice and qualifying and then race. It's much harder being a rookie now than it was even 5 years ago. I mean, when Lewis Hamilton joined McLaren in his rookie season in 2007, he already had over 10,000 miles, which is 16,000 kilometres of testing in a Formula One car done before he turned a wheel in a Grand Prix weekend.
So how is that? How can you explain that?
Because he joined at a time when there just wasn't that testing restrictions. When the top teams would have a testing team. They'd have a race team which would go race to race, and there'd be another team with a couple of cars that would just spend the whole time testing. And so Lewis Hamilton could just fly down, do a couple of days of testing, go back to the next GP2 race. But obviously that's all gone now, so it makes it tough. I mean, do you reckon that they should introduce some rule to allow rookies to get more practice time before they start driving in earnest?
I actually do agree with that. I mean, we saw it happen this year with Kimi Räikkönen. So sure, he's coming back into this new season, but he did 200 laps in a 2010 Renault. You know, how can you get Kimi Räikkönen out there doing this sort of mileage in a car which is only 2 years old, but you're not allowed to have your rookies in the field getting any race experience until it comes to the days of testing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an issue that the FIA is really going to need to address.
Thanks for joining us today, Jem. We appreciate your expert comments, and we hope to get you on the show again soon.
My pleasure.
Thanks for watching, everyone. We do appreciate your support. If you have any questions, comments, or content you would like us to cover on the show, you can email downundersteer@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and remember, Formula One news is always better when it comes from Down Under.